Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Tokuskai Inside Look podcast, where I share inspiring stories of Budoka around the world. Please share your favorite episodes with your dojo and community so this effort can be spread to more corners of the earth. This episode is brought to you by our amazing patrons over at Patreon. By donating as little as a cup of coffee to a bowl of ramen, they've directly made this podcast possible. If you're enjoying this work and can spare a small tip each month, it would mean a lot to me. I'll also be sharing the occasional behind-the-scenes clips and side initiatives that build on this podcast. You can find it at www.patreon.com/Tokuskai Canada. Thanks in advance for your support. And now, on to the interview.
Okay, so my name is Warren Ho, and I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm 2.5 generation Chinese. My father was born in Guangzhou, China, came to South Africa. My mother was 2nd generation. Her parents had come through after World War II and was sort of grew up here in South Africa. So my father met my mom soon after he arrived. I grew up in South Africa back when it was the apartheid. So if you don't know what apartheid was, it was basically racial segregation implemented by the government at the time. And the whole point was to divide and conquer. For them to be able to control the masses, they decided to, sort of put black people with black people, whites with whites, coloreds and Indians, and us Asians, we were non-classified. They would segregate us as well. And that was sort of the way that the white government back then sort of kept power. So I was 18 when apartheid was abolished. So I had been subjected to apartheid for 18 years of my life, even though I was very shielded from it. My parents were very good at doing that, is that they basically protected me from sort of the racial discrimination that was they were subjected to. Things, for instance, like a Groups Area Act, where if they wanted to buy a house in a specific property or area, they would need to ask the neighbors if they minded having Asians or Chinese people living in the community. If any one of the neighbors said no, they weren't allowed to buy the property. And that was still one of the better stories. There was a lot more horrific stories, not only to the Chinese, but worse still to sort of non-white people. But again, my parents had shielded me a lot from that. And it was only really during university that I sort of became aware of all these political issues that were around me. It was also in my university years that I started taking up martial arts very seriously, specifically Taekwondo. My first year, I met an amazing instructor, Scott Crowder, who was a British citizen who sort of came to South Africa, studied here in South Africa for a while. And he sort of took me under his wing, who was only really a few months older than me, yet he was like a big brother to me in martial arts, pretty much set the foundation for me. I had, up until that point, dabbled with a lot of other martial arts, specifically karate with one of the more prominent local senseis here in South Africa, but I couldn't really get into it because of my parents' situation. They worked 7 days a week, and it was very difficult for them to bring me or take me to training, which was quite far out. So university was sort of my foundation years for martial arts, and specifically Taekwondo.
What were your interests when you couldn't do something like martial arts? How did you lead into it? Was it an interest in arts? Was it an interest in sports? Was it an interest in culture?
I think, as you know, as I mentioned earlier, and I think I became very aware of the political situation when I went to university. That was probably one of the few times that I got exposed to non-Chinese people. So up until that point, and for the 3 years in high school, I had gone to an all-Chinese school, and for me that was the norm. I went to a Chinese school associated with Chinese people, my family. We went to friends that were Chinese. So up until I was in standard 7 or grade 8, I didn't know that there were non-Chinese people outside of the community. So my last few years of high school was a big eye-opener to sort of understand the South African landscape of different multicultures. And then university was sort of where I could actually start exploring more. And I think in university I wanted to get more in touch with my Chinese Asian heritage. And unfortunately, there was no Chinese martial arts per se. There was no Chinese martial arts club as university clubs go. There was, however, a Taekwondo club. And like I mentioned, Scott Crowder, who was my first serious teacher, was actually born in Hong Kong. He spoke better Chinese than I did. So it was natural that I wanted to learn from him as much as I could. I must admit, though, when I was at varsity, my first inclination was to find a Asian instructor that could teach an Asian martial art. But I think I was also quite surprised that here's an Englishman that could speak the language, number one, and could do phenomenal Eastern martial arts, Taekwondo. He was amazing with his legs and his martial arts and his philosophies that he followed.
You've gone through a lot of different martial arts just to experiment and to see what it's like. What was your motivation for doing that? And then what did you learn over the years in terms of trying out these different martial arts?
Right. So I think one of the motivations I had was like any other Chinese kid, I suppose. I grew up watching a staple diet of sort of fantasy Hong Kong martial arts TV series and movies. Traditionally, people flying around and doing amazing things and shooting lasers out their eyes. Those were sort of the martial arts that I grew up with, very fantasy based. So obviously, I wanted to explore more of it. I was literally looking for some martial arts that would let me fly, but I didn't find anything. So it was a bit of a disappointment. But again, Taekwondo was probably the first thing that struck me. Was it sometimes defies gravity. Some of the things like these Taekwondos can do, 360s, 540s, 720 reverse hook kicks, it literally defies gravity. So that for me was a big pulling factor. But thereafter, my interest in martial arts grew exponentially. It wasn't just Taekwondo. I started exploring other kinds of martial arts, Hapkido, Wing Chun, a bit of Tai Chi, some of the Filipino martial arts like Eskrima. And it was just like at one stage, it was just I was just a sponge absorbing so much information and martial arts knowledge from so many different teachers. And it was just this lust or this hunger for knowing more. At one stage, I pursued trying to understand pressure points fighting, just because I wanted to understand how the human body would work in a martial arts perspective using the nervous system. And that for me was fascinating as well. So I embarked on a whole journey understanding how pressure point fighting works and incorporate it into different martial arts. So what I did eventually find out is that, and I think Bruce Lee said it, the best, eventually a punch is just a punch and a kick is a kick. Unless we as human beings start growing different appendages, everything is going to be pretty much the same. And every art teaches a different way of doing it, yet it's the same outcomes. You just want to be able to punch or hurt the person. And for me, that was sort of the realization, is that the more different martial arts that I did, the more similarities I found between all of them. They actually have a fundamental principles or underlying philosophies, and they have different ways of communicating those through physical application. And that was sort of my big revelation.
So when you came to that conclusion that like so many of it is just different ways of doing the same thing, but they had different styles, they had different traditions and philosophies. Yep. Which one of those did you latch onto, just like on a personal interest, which seemed to resonate with you the most?
Yeah, look, I think personally, Wing Chun was definitely, was always very appealing. And I've been dabbling with Wing Chun for the last probably about 2-3 decades. And again, it was one of the things where, because it was Chinese and it had such a cultural attachment or connection to me, it really resonated with me. I really liked the Wing Chun principles, especially in terms of as my martial arts evolved, it became at one stage not just philosophical or artistic, it became very relevant and sort of pragmatic for where we are in South Africa. South Africa being, sort of one of the cities in the countries in the world with the highest crime rates, I needed something more practical that, should I need it in a fight or a self-defense situation, I could use it. Wing Chun for me was that kind of martial art. But the only hesitation I had with, sort of pursuing it fully is that we don't really have any sort of world-class instructors here. And that's no disrespect to any of the instructors we have here. It's just that we've always been looking for instructors to bring here or instruct us. And it's been an ongoing journey in the Wing Chun community for years and years.
Could you talk a bit about the need for self-defense in your city and in your country? Because a lot of us would come from like a little more stable or at least safer areas?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I like the word you use, stable. You know, we've been compared to the number of, so just to put it in perspective, we, at the current crime stats, we have up to 60 murders per day, which is the equivalent of a war zone. And so we essentially do have a need for practical self-defense, a need to protect ourselves. And that's over and above what the government is trying to do, which sometimes it's debatable what they are doing. So the need for self-defense, yeah, look, I think our situation in South Africa is very different, and it's contextual again. You know, I mean, we have, as I mentioned, up to 60 murders per day. That's the reality that we live in. We are in a constant state of vigilance. We need to be aware. Even behind me, you'll see that we have burglar bars. I have a high wall, electric fences, you know, dogs, outside beams, armed response, and that for us is a normal kind of situation in South Africa. You know, for some people coming here, they could be paranoid and say, or look at us and say, well, are we being paranoid? I say we're being realistic. We're preparing for what we know is out there. Hence, self-defense for us is a very relevant and very, very real thing, is that we need to take the appropriate actions to plan our safety, number one, and be prepared for what might happen.
Okay. So I want to get back to the self-defense because that's something that you teach in your class. But let's go to, how did Kendo come into the picture?
Right. Yeah, so Kendo was interesting. My Taekwondo instructor, at the time, he was a fifth Dan Taekwondo instructor, and he always had a fascination with Kendo, purely because he loved the tradition of it, the bogu, the hakaman kenogi, and of course using a sword. You know, I think him and I shared a passion for Star Wars, as do many, I think, Kendo people do. And we were just talking about it one day, and he was like, let's try Kendo, because Kendo is sort of has similarities to Star Wars, and it's a samurai art. And we eventually decided to start Kendo, and we had luckily found a Kendo instructor that was based here in South Africa, also a British sensei, who had moved to South Africa with his business and his family, and was doing Kendo in his own garage. And we decided to let's expand this. Let's see if we can get him out to come to the Taekwondo Dojo and do Kendo. So our first engagement with my sensei then, Tony Hughes Sensei, was him doing Kendo in a Taekwondo Dojo, which was quite interesting. I don't know if you notice a Taekwondo Dojo, the mats are quite spongy and soft. And I think he mentioned a couple of times that he's got his foot stuck in when he was trying to do a kuriashi, and dislocated a toe or two because of the Taekwondo mats. So yes, that was my introduction to Kendo. It was a rude awakening, because I think in the first 2 months of doing Kendo, I broke my finger. We were messing around with boktos, and I didn't hit a men cut high enough, and he did a sort of a kaishi do, which hit my finger, my ring finger, and it basically snapped my finger. So I was out of commission for a year thereafter. But after that, I went back to Kendo.
How did the Kendo practice fit in with all the other things that you were doing?
Look, at the time, I was quite heavily into my Taekwondo, and it's contradictory. All the things that you do in Taekwondo versus Kendo it's like chalk and cheese. It was hard to sort of adapt between or switch between the two. And I constantly got told by Tony Sensei that when I did Kendo, it looked too much like Taekwondo. I was bouncing around. My footwork was wrong. It was at a 45-degree angle. No follow through, etc., etc. So it was quite difficult initially, but I think after taking a year break from Kendo because of my injury, and eventually coming back to it, I started, after my injury, I had basically stopped all my other martial arts because I just couldn't do anything. I couldn't punch, I couldn't hold anything with my hand. And then obviously I had a bit of a sort of a lazy stint where I didn't want to train anyway. But when I did go back, I felt that Kendo was more, I started enjoying it a lot more. Just the sort of the movements was starting to be more palatable for me. I was able to do it, without doing Taekwondo for a year. So I was able to do it a lot more easier. And it started coming very naturally to me. And that also thanks to all the martial arts training. And then after that, it started just to escalate from there. I started to take my Kendo a lot more seriously than all my other martial arts, to a point now where I've stopped everything now and just focusing purely on on Kendo and obviously all the other related martial arts like Iaido and Judo as well.
Okay. Can you talk about your development? Like when you went back, now you're really focusing on it. Eventually you made multiple national teams. Can you talk about the progression in there? What was, how did you eventually take it seriously enough? And then how did the teams and just the development of Kendo happen in South Africa?
So I don't know the exact years, but when I went for my Shodan, because we didn't have, and back then we didn't even have enough sort of high level senseis to be able to grade for Shodan, I had to travel to Hungary, Budapest to grade for my Shodan. And that was my first exposure to an international sort of a seminar. There was a Taikai as well, and obviously a Shinsa. And that for me just blew my mind, just the sheer amount of people, all in armor in Bogu, and really good at that time from our perspective, is that they were amazing. And that sort of just really fueled my ambition and my passion for Kendo. So that was getting my Shodan in Budapest. Thereafter, it sort of like started being a lot more dedicated to Kendo, trying to make the national team so that I could travel more. And subsequent to that, I was able to represent my country, South Africa, 3 times in the European Kendo Championships and 3 times in the World Kendo Championships. And that for me was, again, life-changing experiences. Going from initially, my first World Championship was in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, 2009 it was. And then my last one was 2015 at the Budokan Tokyo, Japan. And those were amazing experiences. The one in between is the Novara, Italy one as well. So yeah, being part of the national team was a great eye opener to international Kendo, seeing what's out there, and just in terms of, and this was a big revelation, how far behind we were. Up until that point, Kendo already in South Africa had been around for 25 years, but we were quite stagnant. We weren't growing, we weren't progressing in international competitions, and it was quite an eye opener to see just how far behind we had fallen to the rest of the world, not just Europe, but to the Americas and to the Asian regions as well. So I decided to be part of the South African Kendo Federation executive committee, where I could start playing a more active role in pushing South African Kendo forward. And initially I started off just doing sort of the secretarial work. I was a treasurer at one time. Then I progressed on to sort of development, to the vice president, and eventually sort of the president. And I was part of the EXCO for a good decade, if not more. My last 4 years of being part of EXCO was as the South African president of the South African Kendo Federation. And there we started to look a lot at trying to change our Kendo to be more internationally acceptable, or more internationally geared, so that we could take part actively and be a sort of a worthy competitor in international competitions. Up until that point, we've always had a lot of Japanese senseis visiting us in South Africa, purely because they like our safaris and they like the game and the game drives. But the Kendo, and because they were older senseis, were always focused on a lot of Kihon and basics and doing big, long, straight Kendo. And for a good 20 years, that was the Kendo that we engaged with. And there was nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't good for Shiai. We did eventually start bringing in a whole European contingent of senseis, and slowly our Kendo started becoming a lot faster, a lot more geared towards Shiai and competition. So our Kendo nowadays is a little bit different from what it used to be, but we do have a proud history of our traditional Japanese senseis Kendo mixed with our European blend now that we have too.
So you noticed that, or you mentioned that you noticed this difference between South African Kendo and what you were seeing in the rest of the world. Could you talk about through those 3 world championships that you attended, maybe from a personal point of view, even like what was your level of development? What did you see in South Africa that you saw was different in the world? I guess it was Brazil, the first one, and then like for each progression, because there's 4 years in between. That's in Budo time, that's not a lot, but in like training and improvement, you can see a lot more. So
2009 was the Sao Paulo, Brazil World Kendo Championships, and that for me was just amazing to watch. Number one, it was my first experience of non-European Kendo, so Americas and Asias. Getting to see them on an international platform and competing on that platform was amazing. So the Brazilians themselves were amazing, all amazing competitors. What always struck me was that all the Brazilians have Japanese names. So it did make a revelation that Brazil has the sort of the largest contingent of Japanese outside of Japan. That for me was an eye-opener. It was also the first time that I saw China compete, and I think it was the first year that China took a team and competed at the World Championships. Our team was in the pool games. We went against China, and for me that was quite. It was almost full circle. You know, I had been pursuing martial arts my whole life, trying to find a suitable Chinese martial art to find. Couldn't find one, so I went into Korean and Japanese martial arts, and here I was facing the Chinese team in Kendo in Brazil. And you know, we unfortunately lost to them. They weren't particularly very good at the time. They've obviously improved vastly since then. But it was quite interesting because my conversation with the Chinese captain at the time was interesting, because it was, we both looked at each other and said, "Well, you're South African, you're Chinese," and I was like, "You're Chinese, but you're doing Japanese martial arts." So that for me was quite funny, and we had a nice conversation about that. And I explained my history of being here in South Africa, and he explained his history as why he was doing Japanese martial arts. And for him, he loved the Japanese culture. But he also said to me, which was quite interesting, and I hope this is okay, you might want to edit it out. He said to me, "Look, we're not good now, but eventually we want to be able to beat the Japanese at their own game." And that for me was quite an interesting comment, given the history that China and Japan have had. So we had a big chuckle about that. And for me, that was quite a nice nod to say, look, it's okay to do Japanese martial arts. You know, just enjoy it.
I think that's a quite worthy goal to beat the Japanese. I think that's all, everyone here has the same thing. So I don't think that's controversial in any way.
Absolutely. I think it was just the controversy came because it was a Chinese guy saying it to another Chinese guy. It was sort of like, well, you know, because of all our history, and the Koreans, I think, have a similar history, you know, where the Japanese tried to invade China. It was just interesting from that perspective. And we had a good chuckle about that. Yeah, I think the other thing was during that time, I also visited Nanjing in China. That was the first time I'd been to Nanjing. I've been to China a few times, but it was the first time that I went to sort of the old capital. And it was, if you know the history of it, it was the first place where the Japanese tried to invade China. And, you know, they have a whole museum there where they show, you know, sort of the atrocities. And given there are war atrocities both sides, but, you know, from a Chinese perspective, it was the Chinese propaganda. This is what the Japanese did. And I was left quite emotional and emotionally torn between, you know, sort of my heritage of being Chinese and doing a Japanese martial arts. And I was very torn at the time, right after the World Championships. Like, should I still be doing Kendo? You know, because it's, you know, fundamentally my ancestors are, they're almost like enemies. And when I used to speak to my granny about it, and my granny, because she had left when she was 13, and it was right after World War II, she was quite adamant that I should not be doing anything Japanese. And so I had a very big internal debate about it. And it was at one stage, you know, I had considered stopping Kendo because of this whole sort of internal debate. But eventually, I think I spoke to my sensei about it, and he said to me, "You know what, do it because of Kendo, nothing else. You know, respect the culture, respect where it's come from, but it doesn't mean that, you know, I can forego my Chinese culture." And so for that, I sort of made peace with it. And yeah, and as evident now, I'm very passionate about it now and pursuing it as much as I can. Would you like?
Yeah. So the next one is Novara.
Yeah, it was Novara, Italy. That World Championship was very interesting. We were plotted against Japan in the pool grounds. I think when we looked at it, you know, I think everybody rolled their eyes and they basically said, "Well, sorry guys, you just got the worst draw ever." Is that we got Japan in the first pool round, and I was at the time playing Kyusho, and I think I fought against Ichimura Sensei. I didn't last longer than 30 seconds against him, so. But I'm happy to say I lost 2 good kotes to Ichimura Sensei. That's my claim to fame. I didn't last anything longer than a minute. He just killed me. But it was such an experience, you know, for them. It was, we were terrified, obviously, of them, but we tried to give it our best. And as much as we tried, you know, neither of the team members made it past the 1 minute mark. And that, again, just highlighted just how far we were from, well, the world championship at the moment, I suppose. I remember our sensei who flew all the way from Japan and trained us for 2 months. He just basically took us after that match and he ripped us to shreds. He basically, what did we learn? Why do we even do kendo? And it's a very typical, I think, old style Japanese sensei is that, you know, he could find nothing right. He just gave us everything that was wrong. And man, as bad as we felt, he made us feel 10 times worse at the end of it. We were so bad, demotivated. It was like we shouldn't even be doing kendo. But regardless of that outcome, I think we still managed to enjoy the kendo that was there, that was on display in Novara. It was an amazing time. Again, it was the finals were again Japan versus Korea. For us, it's always a nail-biting experience. It was the first time that I saw just how much competitiveness there was between the Japanese and the Korean teams. There was one incident, and I can't remember exactly, but I think the Japanese had got, he tried to do a ski, but got it stuck in under the Korean player's armpit. And that must have been painful. But the Korean player just went like this and basically snapped the shinai in two with his arm. And that's what stopped the match. And basically pulled the shinai out of his armpit and threw it down. And it was literally at a 90-degree angle that he snapped the shinai. Subsequent to that, Japanese guy just got another shinai and they just went on to get it. It was an amazing time. And I think it was, for me, it was such an eye-opener. It was amazing. The last one, which was the 2015 World Championships in Tokyo, Japan, that was also a mind-blowing experience, being able to do kendo in the Budokan with, I don't know how many years, but, you know, with a full house of spectators, 8 Iaidos going at the same time. It was, to say mind-blowing would be sort of like not doing it justice. It was just great being there, number one, being in the atmosphere, being able to compete on that level. And again, although we didn't do very well, we still got a good opportunity to watch some really good kendo in sort of like in the homeland in Japan. So personally, for me, that was the year that I retired from international competition. It was quite an emotional one. Again, I fought in a Tasha position, and yeah, I think as much as we didn't do well, I'd like to think that our team performed as best as we could at that given time with the skill level that we had. So all good memories, all very good memories.
Could you talk a little bit about your involvement in team? Like you said that you've retired from the thing. What have you gained from that experience of being part of the national team in general? And what will you take from it to in this next chapter of your Kendo life?
Yeah, look, I think I'm in two minds about it. You know, I think being in national team is actually it is a badge of honor, but at the same time, it is a big responsibility. You know, I think all people that become part of the national team should have a responsibility of not only being able to do their best in competitions, but to be able to bring the experience back to their home country, especially like a small country like ours, and share their knowledge and experience. I think that's important. The only way that I felt at the time as a country doing kendo, we can only move forward by gaining more experience and more knowledge from the people that go overseas. And I think the national team at the time, we were very focused on, you know, just trying to do good shiai, good good fast kendo. But kendo is so much more than just that. There's so much more to kendo than just the competition aspect, even though a lot of people place focus on it. So what I did take out of it is, yes, there is a time that we can be very competitive, but there's also got to be a time where we have to give back to the community. And I think that's where sometimes we fall short, is that we don't give enough, is that the people that go overseas need to come back and share that knowledge, spread that knowledge, where it's holding seminars or traveling to dojos to help them grow the experience as well, especially for a developing kendo country like us in South Africa.
And now you have your own dojo. Can you talk about starting it, and then how has it developed over the last few years?
Yeah, so we started our dojo, the Rivonia Kendo Club, in 2015, February. And so it's been going on for just under 5 years now. And initially, because I was the SAQA president, I wasn't able to focus fully on it. My objective was always to grow all the dojos simultaneously while I was the president and sort of push us all along. So the dojo had been sort of floating by. We had assistant instructors running it. But in the last 2 years, when I retired from executive sort of positions, I started focusing a lot on the dojo and growing our membership base and trying to incorporate sort of the whole philosophy of Koken Chi, which is the mutual love of the sword for a better society. So using that philosophy, we built our dojo on that philosophy, as well as 3 principles of focus training, being very family orientated and not necessarily blood related, but having a very family kind of orientation where we care about each other and worry about each other, as well as having a lot of fun. All the photos that you'll probably see of us is making funny faces and pointing at each other. So the dojo has grown exponentially, and more so during this last year, believe it or not, during the COVID times. We've taken on online members as well, but we've grown quite substantially, to the point where I think we're either the 2nd or 1st largest dojo in the country at the moment.
I noticed that you had some coaching certifications. So could you talk a bit about how that has helped you in being an instructor?
Yeah, so the coaching certifications you're referring to, well, I've been to, first of all, Kitamoto, which is the International Foreign Leaders Kendo Camp, which is held in Kitamoto, Japan. I went to it twice, and obviously trying to incorporate a lot of their teachings into the way that I run the dojo. But also there's a national certification that we have, which is through the Martial Arts Society of South Africa. And they have their own coaching qualifications. And that is really that was more of a general coaching kind of methodology that, we want to incorporate into our training. But you're absolutely right. I think each person and each dojo has their own teaching flavor in terms of how they impart the knowledge onto the next lot of students. But the nice thing about Kendo, as I'm sure you know, is that the syllabus is pretty, I wouldn't say standard, but it is one Kendo. There is no different branches of all these different Kendos throughout the world. It really is just one Kendo from the International Kendo Federation. There we obviously use all Japan Kendo Federation textbooks to sort of reinforce our teachings, where it's textbooks on fundamentals or kata, etc., etc. So we do use that loosely as our syllabus to teach Kendo.
So the national coaching certification that you mentioned,
yes.
Normally if we were just to practice doing Kendo or whatever martial art, over time we watch our instructors and we learn some things through experience. What is the benefit of going through the coaching certification courses and whatever? What do you learn from that normally you wouldn't gain from just pure experience?
So I think the nice thing about coaching qualifications is the methodologies that they employ. They are tried and tested methodologies, and these are general coaching methodologies. It's not necessarily Kendo methodologies. So what our coaching qualification gives us is a sort of like a baseline coaching methodology as such, where we recorded sort of the methods that we employ to coach the students. I must admit though, and please, if this is not suitable for your podcast, edit it out, is that the coaching qualification that I did was really just a rubber stamp, to say the least. We needed it because they were implementing this requirement that all people that wanted to teach martial arts needed some coaching qualification. But the reality was that it was really just a rubber stamp. Some guy came in for 2 days and basically regurgitated the entire coaching syllabus to us. There wasn't much practical, that was done. And I hope I don't, badmouth them, but the idea is that they just needed to have some people to show that they had coaching qualifications. They did have what we call previous experience. So like our older senseis, because they've been senseis for decades, they didn't need to do this. So it was sort of like the past experience where they sort of qualified for it without having to go through the whole rigmarole that we did.
No, absolutely. We've had similar type of things at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center here in Toronto. You're required to go through certain courses just so that the center can get insurance. So there's like practical reasons for doing these type of things, even if they're not helpful in the teaching sense.
Absolutely.
So I want to move on to this next, this kind of transition in your life as well. You're focusing less, like you're not part of the national team anymore or the executive committee. You're focusing on the Kendo, but then your own personal kind of growth and development in Kendo and outside of Kendo, trying out different things. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think for the last 2 years, the Kendo has been quite for me, being no longer part of the politics as such has been quite liberating. So I have been able to do a lot more kendo, number one. And also just because I got my 5th Dan, which is quite a big milestone for me. I say recently, but it was last year really. It was a big milestone for me and a good push for me to get the dojo going and sort of push the kendo journey further. Not only that though, I wanted to always experiment or do Iaido and Jodo, which is what we started doing, believe it or not, online at the beginning of this year. So 9 months later, we're still doing Iaido and Jodo. We have some world-class senseis teaching us online at the moment, and hoping that we can establish an online, a local Iaido and Jodo presence here in South Africa. So the journey has been great in the sense that I'm still teaching kendo. I'm still learning, not as much as I'd like to, obviously, because we don't have a lot of high-level senseis here. But the Iaido and Jodo have been huge challenges for me that allows me to learn more about the martial arts and Japanese martial arts per se.
So what is this online training like? And
so online, it's challenging, obviously, and two-dimensional. It's hard. But again, it boils down to the quality of the instruction. And thankfully, we do have some very good, highly qualified senseis that are teaching us. And they are able to, even in a two-dimension, spot that, perhaps the Hasuji is in the wrong angle for Masaya when I put it into Masaya. So they're able to spot that. And it has been quite beneficial. We keep practicing it, obviously. The Iaido, for instance, only has 12 Zenkin-rin kata, which we are practicing and constantly doing. And the instructors keeps on telling us that we have to change 1, 2, and 3. It's the finer details, I suppose, for Iaido. Jodo has been also quite exciting. We started doing Jodo practice, just the Kihon Dosa, which is also good. And later on, it might be quite interesting how we're going to start doing kata, because we're supposed to be doing it with a tachi. So because we're learning only the Jo side, we're going to learn the tachi side now and understand how we can combine the two on our own through like a interactive medium like the internet. So it has been a very interesting journey. It has been a very rewarding journey because for me personally, I've got to meet not just more kendo people, but more Iaido and Jodo people throughout the world. And the experience has been wonderful. People have been so generous with their time and their knowledge. So it has been a good experience.
Yeah, it's so interesting because like from a place that we started online here because we couldn't get into the dojo. So we had a reason to prevent, but in that sense, like this is really accelerating the fact that for remote areas that don't have high level teachers, that you can start, like this is a way to begin. And so it's not like a replacement for something because that never existed, but now you have access. So that's cool.
Well, interesting you should mention that. I mean, I had a call from a guy the other day, and he stays in Richards Bay, which is one of our coastal cities, and it's good 300-400 kilometers away from where I am. But exactly that, he wants to start a training with us, both kendo and for Iaido, and the only way he's going to be able to do it for now is through an online medium. The eventuality is I'd like to travel down to the coast and give him some proper instruction. So yeah, it's funny you should say that because that's the reality. The remote areas now also have access to these martial arts.
So the last topic I want to talk about before we wrap up with some rapid fire questions is these days there's a lot more talk about just general health and wellness of the individual. And that involves with either getting fit or having a better diet or doing meditation and yoga and all that kind of stuff. How have you explored those areas? And then how do you see those going into your kendo?
Yeah, look, I think it's a holistic kind of experience. I think kendo is one part of it. It's the fitness part, but not even fitness. What I did realize during lockdown, because we were doing so much saburi and kihon, is I developed some shoulder issues from doing repetitive motions with 1 kg saburito. So there has to be something else that you can supplement with your kendo training, whether it's cross training, whether it's stretching, whether it's yoga. There has to be something else. That all combined also, I think I've come to realization at my age, and I'm not giving my age away, is that yes, dieting is a big important part of training as well. For me to keep the same energy levels and perform at the levels of my students, or at least can give them a good run for it, I have to be eating and sleeping well as well. And I think it's holistic. As much as I'd like to think martial arts is sort of the do-all and end-all. If I only do martial arts, I'll be fine. There has to be supplemental stuff that you do, whether it's weight training, stretching, additional cardio work, and proper rest and proper nutrition is just as important. Oh, and the one thing you mentioned as well, which is good, meditation. I think meditation, absolutely. I don't do enough of it myself, but definitely is very, very beneficial for the type of training that we do.
So for someone that wants to try out some of these things, could you give some pointers on like, how did you start? What were resources and what were little experiments that you can play with just to change up your lifestyle a bit?
So and I've had quite a few students that wanted to start, martial arts, but I think the big question is they need to want to do it for a particular reason. I think the students that leave, and I've seen a few leave, is because they're not clear as to why they started initially and why they continue doing it. So the big question is always when a new student comes in, why do you want to do it? And what is your outcome that you're looking for? Some will say they want to do it because they have a passion for Japanese culture, which is good. Some others want to try and experiment with a martial art. They've never done martial arts. They'd love to do a martial art. I'll give them a full blow of it in terms of this is what martial art entails. It's not what you see in the movies. You're going to work hard for it. Some people come for the social. They want to come they want to interact with other people and do something on a Wednesday evening. That's also okay. But they just got to be clear as to what is it that they want out of it. If they're just coming just for the sake of coming, I think those are the ones that are, they're looking for something but don't know exactly what. If they can give me some kind of guideline as to what they're looking for, then yes, I think, any three of the martial arts that we do can be beneficial, provided you know what you want out of it.
Cool. So I want to ask you a few rapid fire questions. These are just a fun way of getting to know you in different areas. The first one would be, do you have a quote or a proverb or a motto or something that you think about often or live by?
I do actually. I don't know it offhand, but it goes something like, it's so terrible because I used to have this on my wall. And I'll say Bruce Lee because, I don't know if you guys get the series in America. It's called Warrior. It's a Bruce Lee inspired TV series that stars quite a few prominent Canadian actors actually, and they just finished season 2 now. But it was filmed here in South Africa, and I was privileged enough to have been part of the background or the action extras.
Oh, cool!
Yeah, Warrior. Yeah, it was actually the name of the series. Bruce Lee actually had envisaged this. Shannon Lee was here in South Africa. She was the executive producer. So a very cool series though, and I got to play several gangsters in there as well. Just out of interest, what time is it there in Canada at the moment?
Right now it's 6:24
in the evening.
In the morning.
In the morning. Oh wow.
We started at 5:30 a.m.
Oh wow. Geez, sorry, I didn't realize it was that early for you guys.
No, I set it up at this time. This is actually very helpful because my daughter wakes up around 6:45 a.m. to get ready for school. So like I can finish off an interview before and then get her ready.
Is she at school or is she doing online schooling?
She's at a private school, so they have a pretty good setup there. But even public school right now, they give the parents the option of staying at home or going in. And some parents just don't have a choice. They have to go to work. For us, we could keep her at home, but I just if it's safe enough at school, she needs that social contact with people. Like we're not going to friends' houses and anything. She's 6.
Yeah. Oh yeah, okay. My son is also turning 6 next month actually.
Oh wow.
But I can totally relate at this age. They just need that social interaction. So important.
Yeah, because their brains are still developing at this age. So
yeah,
you don't even know what the long-term effects could be if they were kept in isolation for even just 6 months to a year.
Yeah, one of our neighbors has been keeping her daughter for the last 6 months at home, and you can see it really has affected her social skills. She doesn't want to leave the house now, and she's only 9, so it's not good. Anyway, should we try another rapid fire one?
Sure. Another question would be, what have you changed your mind over in the last few years? Something that you believed in deeply, but now it's a different point of view.
Okay, well, how about in the last couple of weeks? And I think I came to a stark realization is that, through the martial arts, and because I was bullied at school, I needed to develop self-confidence. And I think self-confidence was a big thing in martial arts that their punch. And every martial art I've learned or studied, a lot of it is about self-confidence. But what I have realized is there's got to be a measure, is that you don't go over the barrier and become arrogant. So there has to be a fine balance between being self-confident and arrogant. And I think that hit me in the face quite literally a couple of weeks ago, is that, I was being typical, trying to be all sensei and everything, and being very arrogant about it. And it wasn't the right way. So yeah, I think that for me has been a very revelation. It's been something very profound that I've come to accept, that as much as I want to be self-confident, and we must be self-confident, we just got to be wary of being too confident and being arrogant to the point where, you can't see anything else.
Mm-hmm. Are you a dog person or a cat person, and why?
I'm a dog person for sure, because I'm allergic to cats, number one. But I grew up with dogs, and in South Africa we have something called staffies. It's the jock of the bushveld, so they're really stock and short, and they don't bark, they just bite. So I love dogs.
Oh, they don't bark.
Yeah, well, they bark only when they want to play, but when they attack, they really don't bark. They like little silent little hunters.
Nice. What is your comfort food?
Sushi. I love sushi. I cannot get enough of sushi. It's like, and actually Japanese food in general. If we had more Japanese restaurants here, I mean, we only have 2 in Johannesburg, like 2 authentic Japanese restaurants. If they had more, I would probably visit them every day. But sushi is my absolute favorite. I love it. I eat it every day. Yeah, my whole family loves sushi. So yeah, that's my comfort food.
So you've traveled quite a bit, not only for the World Championships, for the European Championships, for training. What is something besides your actual training equipment that you like to take with you when you're traveling, that you feel is essential?
2 things. One is a flashlight. So whatever reason, I've always carried a flashlight with me, whether it's on the plane. It's the only self-defense tool, if you want to call it that I'm allowed on to a plane with. And it's quite a bright one. And you never know when you need a light. I find myself countless times needing a flashlight for some odd reasons, wherever we may be. So the flashlight is definitely the one tool that I take with me. The other one is, and it sounds terrible, it's a lip balm. Do you guys call it lip balm?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, lip balm. I have terrible lips, so wherever I go to, either it's too wet or it's too dry. So the lip balm, soothes it. Or else I have really big fat lips otherwise. So lip balm is my other thing.
No, I can definitely agree with that. Right now, it's getting into wintertime here in Toronto, and it gets dry. So yeah, chapped lips don't feel good.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, it's adapt from everything.
Second last question. If someone were to open your YouTube account, YouTube recommends videos based on what you've watched in the past, what would people see as YouTube recommending to you?
The Daily Show. So I don't know if you guys get it in Canada, but the Daily Show, which is hosted by South African comedian Trevor Noah. Believe it or not, I get a lot of my my American politics updates from there. I don't really understand the American networks. There's so many conflicting views, but I find that more satirical kind of shows like the Daily Show, sort of give you like a comedic spin of it, but it gives me a more true account as to what's happening. Unfortunately, I've become so jaded by this whole fake media thing. It's like I can't even trust any news networks anymore. So the Daily Show is definitely something I watch almost religiously every day or second day.
Did it have anything to do with when Trevor Noah took over for Jon Stewart, because he's a South African?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was a fan of Trevor Noah before he became the host of the Daily Show. Loved his stuff. So absolutely, when he took it over the Daily Show, it was like, wow, it's Trevor. Let's watch him on an international platform. Hey, guess what? We get to learn about world politics as well. And at that time, it was all about American politics. And yeah, I would like to think it was definitely a South African sort of patriotism, supporting our fellow Saffers, as we call them.
Mm-hmm. Well, Warren, this has been a very, very interesting, very fun conversation. I feel like we grew up in a similar type of background with a kind of Chinese culture upbringing in a foreign country. So I feel like I could talk to you for ages, but let's save that for a follow-up in the future. So in closing for this one, do you have any message that you want to say to the audience? Any closing words that you want to impart?
Yeah, look, I think I've listened to a lot of your shows, Patrick, and they're great. They're all great, But I think when people look at the podcast like this, I think look beyond just what you see in terms of, I'm a Kendo instructor, I do Iaido and Jodo. There's a lot more behind every person. And just learning it, like I said, coming to my revelation the other day, it's not about self-confidence or arrogance. Find that balance. Just be confident enough that, hey, you have a history as well. Let me learn about your history. So be more accepting. I think that's the underlying thing, is that, be more accepting. And there's so much interesting stuff out there. Go for it and go seek it and learn about it.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed that conversation.
Patrick, thank you so much. It was so good to meet you, and thank you again. Such a privilege to be on your podcast later on. I hope it works out.
Thank you. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Patrick. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode, because we have a lot more exciting conversations to share as we explore the world of the traditional Japanese martial arts. The Inside Look podcast is brought to you by our amazing patrons over at Patreon. If you are enjoying this work, please consider supporting me at patreon.com/Tokuskai Canada. To contribute to this effort, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at tokuskai.canada, or subscribe to our newsletter at subscribe@tokuskai.ca. Until next time, thanks for listening.